Hello, welcome to Talent Acquisition Trends and Strategy. I'm your host, James Mackey. I'm really excited today. Our guest is a friend of mine, Janine Yancey. Welcome to the show. How are you?
I'm good, James. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, thank you for joining us today. And we have a lot of great topics outlined. Before we jump into the topics for today, would you mind just sharing with everybody a little bit about your background and experience? I want everybody tuning in to understand your perspective on the topics we discuss.
Oh, cool. Super. So I'm founder and CEO of Emtrain. We provide online education in ethics, respect, and inclusion, as well as predictive analytics for people to see where the hot spots are before they really experience them. And I was motivated to do that because I had been an employment litigator and workplace investigator, and I saw kind of the behaviors that led to the problems. So I'm like, okay, rather than doing this manually, I need to connect the dots for organizations to be able to do this at scale.
For sure, for sure. And you're working with like the types of customers you're working with. Can you just give us some insight? Is it like primarily tech companies, or is it across several industries? And what size of organizations are you doing this for?
So we are working with a lot of tech, like Workday and Cisco and LinkedIn, as well as other industry companies in other industries, healthcare, financial, professional services, primarily mid-market and enterprise, but we also support the smaller businesses as well.
Okay, cool. All right, nice. So I think that's a really good overview. And to dive into our first topic, you have a lot of experience hiring for your team. And I think what we want to discuss first off is, as you're hiring, I would love to just learn a little bit about your high level philosophy on attracting the right folks onto your team, and making sure that you're able to transition folks from essentially new hires into value creators that are going to help you move forward in your missions. What are some of the high level thoughts that you have on lessons learned that you have on attracting the right people to your team?
Yeah, so and let me just preface this by saying I feel like I've unfortunately learned all my lessons the hardest way possible, like by hitting my head against the wall, like, oh, ouch, don't do that again. So just through kind of trial and error and lessons learned, I think you're always looking obviously for the skill set, but then also we don't exist in a vacuum. So I'm looking at kind of the social fabric, if you will, and the dynamics of a particular team, and trying to recruit somebody that's going to add to those dynamics, add to the diversity, add to like I think about it as like a basketball team. I played basketball in high school, right? And so you could be a great a great guard, but if you don't play well with your team, it ain't gonna work, right? So like, and I guess it's not surprising because Emtrain focuses on our social dynamics, right? So that's
Right.
my lens is always going to be social dynamics, and does this candidate have the skill set to take us to the next level? And just as importantly, does this person connect well? And will they be additive to the team?
So it's in terms of connecting well, do you focus more on like alignment when it comes to values and the mission, or is it more so the actual interactions that they have with the team throughout the interview process? Like, I'm just wondering, how do you really, I suppose, evaluate whether or not somebody's going to be getting along, or able to work effectively with their team?
So it's both. And not every organization is as mission driven as Emtrain is, right? So Emtrain, we are super mission driven, and we're trying to increase and develop everyone's respect muscle and inclusion muscle and ethics muscle, and then so that that definitely is a common denominator, I think, for everyone here in our organization. So that, and then on top of that, having people that are like a growth mindset. I mean, it's work. And the thing that I tell everyone here on my team, we've got 60 employees, I think. I'm like, listen, it takes work to have a marriage, it takes work to have a friendship. It's a two-way street. It takes work. And so the people that we're recruiting onto our team are people that actually have a little savviness and understanding that interacting with people takes work. And these are muscles that we're constantly developing.
Yeah, for sure. I'm trying to think through our own recruiting process for building Secure Vision. And I think that is something where I think we've gotten it right most of the time, but it becomes glaringly obvious very quickly when we get it wrong. And what's interesting is when something goes wrong with maybe a team member that doesn't interact well with the others, it really it typically hasn't had anything to do with their competency toward
No,
doing the actual job. It's just more so like maybe somebody's like it's more of like a personality thing, or they don't seem to collaborate well, or they seem to be like defensive, or there might be some just kind of like character trait, if you will, that makes it difficult to interact with a person. And I think like that's really like trying to find like what's difficult is then from a recruiting standpoint, really trying to uncover that proactively. And then how do you do that in a way that doesn't let like bias creep in? Because do you really know, like, are you making an assumption about something that someone mentioned in an interview that like would make you think that they're not going to interact well with others? Or is that based in reason? Do we have like actual like data or premises based on like how they I mean, how do you do like it's kind of hard, right? Like I would have to say that I don't think I've been able to kind of perfectly solve for that. You know what I mean?
well, it is hard. And, let me just kind of clarify, I'm not suggesting that that any of us are looking for one type of communication style or one type of personality. It's more of being super intentional and communicating that we all have different communication styles to some extent and different tolerance levels for different behaviors. And it's the patience and ability to be flexible that we're looking for. Right. So some of us, like I'm thinking my exec team, some of us are super quick, fast thinkers. We usually don't even finish a sentence and we're on to the next sentence, right? Other
I do that.
people are really linear, really like slow cooked food, like really slow. That's hard for me because I'm like, on to square 10 and my colleague is still on square one, right? So, but that's not a bad thing because they're going to go slow and deep and I'm going to probably go superficial level and just triage 10 things at once, right? So we both have our different strengths and weaknesses, and that's hard. And
Mhm.
so having the muscle and the flexibility to be okay with that, that to me is what we're all recruiting for, because people
Yeah,
are hard.
it is. And I think that that's actually something that I'm seeing as a very important part of my skill set as a CEO. And I think for any leader that leads a team is also learning how to have folks work together
Mhm.
and with the different personalities, right? Like, and the realities are going to have some people on your team that are going to say yes to you, even though they don't have the bandwidth. You're going to have
Right.
other people at your team that are going to get incredibly defensive with feedback and constantly say no to you. You're going to have other people that like to work independently. And it's like, how do you pull together everyone in such a way? And I think, what's interesting is I think I've primarily hired through, again, like just more so focusing on skill set. And that has created like, I guess, certain dynamics, which I don't know are necessarily good or bad, but you're right. Like just being like the simple point of like being able to work with folks and try to like figure out their different train of thoughts. And then like, I think leadership too, getting more into this conversation, is like, it's so situational. Like
Mhm.
you can't really lead two people the same way. I mean, you can
No.
have your overall culture and mission that cascades down to everybody else in the organization. And there's certain values, right, that you want to operate as a company. And I think that's great. And if you can actually incorporate that into process opposed to it being something an employee handbook that no one ever looks at, like I think that's great. But I mean, there's just going to be some people's like, okay, when you have somebody who's like defensive and really likes to do things their way and they don't want to
Right.
hear what you have to say, like when it comes to change, it's like, okay, well, how do I get buy-in from that person? that to me is usually the most difficult personality to deal with, which happens. And like honestly, some of the best people I've ever worked with, like in terms of smartest and most capable, sometimes have that. And it's like, well, how do you kind of go through that? And so I feel like you learn how to navigate that. Then others I have, again, like people that they're really dedicated to their work. They want to get it all done and they don't want to say no
Right.
because they want to be that person. And then there's like that check and balance, like making sure you're really diving into like their capacity and how's it going. And like, how do we, just those types of conversations. So I have found that really interesting. And I think the more that like I've grown as a leader, the more I really consider the social fabric and the team dynamics than maybe I would have like 5 years ago.
So kind of riffing off of what you just said, James, I would maybe summarize it as, you know, prioritizing, making space for it takes energy and being intentional and like planning how you're going to show up to each person on the team. And in past years, or I'd say earlier in my journey, I didn't carve out time for that. Right. So I was all about getting work done and less about, okay, supporting and enabling people on my team is work. I gotta identify that as yet another work project and not shortchanging my available kind of um resources to support to do justice to that, right? And
Mhm.
I think that's part of the learning journey. I think that's usually I would imagine that's typically what happens. Like people, it's an afterthought, and people are all about the actual work and not
Yeah.
about the people, which are also work. But everything that you're describing, like Ken Blanchard's servant leadership kind of style, it's exactly what you're describing, right? Some people, you need to know that they will always say yes, even when they shouldn't be saying yes. And that's the
Yeah.
job of a leader to say, okay, let's just actually go through this to see if this is realistic for you.
Hmm.
And on the opposite end, people will react and push back like, oh, no, I'm too overwhelmed, and you gotta walk them through that too. It just, each person takes a different style.
It does. And I think that that's like the really hard thing to teach leaders. And I think it's a skill set that can be developed, but I also think like some people they just notice the little nuance and the little things like, and that's such a valuable skill set as an executive to just be able to pick up on very small changes in tone or body language or facial expressions or I mean to the like if you can get really good at that, like I think it's just such a game changer as a
Right.
leader. And I think like maybe one thing we should put a greater emphasis on when it comes to hiring and our team is when we're interviewing a candidate, does the leader that this person's going to be reporting into, it doesn't mesh or they don't have to be similar, but like can that leader like communicate effectively, or if this person is a little bit more fiery and independent and maybe a little defensive, does that leader have the skill set or the ability to work with that I guess like the social fabric, right? Like maybe that is something we should be considering. It's like, as part of like, is this person, somebody that's going to be able to operate effectively on our team? We should also be thinking about the specific dynamic between the leader or the manager and that individual as well. Like,
So I totally agree. And this sounds, a little maybe kind of silly, but I think I've shared with you before. There is something to being like a mom CEO, right? So like your mom and you're like kind of matching your little kids, like, oh, these two could be friends and these two could be friends. And as silly as it sounds, I look for that. Like, okay,
yeah,
who's gonna be friends? Because we know, and I think there's plenty of research to corroborate this, that people need to have a connection with their manager. They need to feel like they are getting something positive from their manager, and they need to have at least one friend on their team. I mean, it sounds really basic, but there you have it. And so like, if the manager and the direct report aren't going to have a good connection, that's a problem. And then if
it's
that
a
person
huge problem.
if that person's getting recruited onto a team where it's a question as to who they might become personally friendly with, like everyone should make a friend from work. I mean, like, that's just part of our work experience. Like most of us, a lot of our friends come from work.
Yeah, I think too, it's honestly, like I think if I'm looking at before I started Secure Vision and my own performance in a role, I think in situations in which like I had a genuine connection with my colleagues, I probably performed at a higher level. I had more to
Right.
look forward to because the reality is like we're not going to love everything about our role. And sometimes we're going to have to do things that we don't like. And to the extent that we can kind of get that lift from the human interaction
Hmm.
and have fun with that, it kind of balances out maybe some of the tasks that we're not quite as passionate about. And I mean, we want to be passionate about the mission, of course, but if you're not driving toward a mission with the people that have like shared values and can get along and enjoy each other's company, like I'm not saying everybody has to be best friends, but as you said, it's like you don't necessarily have to hit it off with everyone, but you want to kind of find a few folks that you do hit it off within the org, and I think that makes the role more enjoyable, right?
Totally. It makes it more enjoyable and it brings a little bit more accountability because when you're delivering something, you've got people that you respect kind of checking out what you're delivering. Like, oh, how'd they do that? Oh, okay.
Yeah.
That's just going to naturally kind of make us, a little bit more conscientious in our work product.
Yeah, for sure. And, what's actually interesting dynamic now too, it's like I have folks on my team that I know like the concept of social accountability works really well for. And then I have other folks on my team that we get incredibly pissed off if I like push too much in
Oh,
that direction. So it's like I have some people where like I know if I have a suggestion, like, hey, let's bring it up on a team meeting. And then I have other people where I'm like, no way in hell I'm
no.
bringing this up on a call. Like I'll call you at the side, right? Like
All right. Don't pressure me.
right. And I actually heard a tip. This was from a revenue executive. I'm blanking on his name, but I met him in a like a pavilion. I don't know if you heard of pavilion. It's like a networking uh thing for primarily revenue leaders, but he wasn't a CEO, but he was a revenue executive, and he talked
Mhm.
about influencing CEOs, and he said public loyalty buys private influence, which I thought was like a really interesting
Oh, interesting.
perspective. So
I
he
like
talked about
that.
his dynamic, like in ever a team setting, he was always the biggest advocate. And by showing that alignment and support, behind the scenes, he was able to really influence
Hmm.
CEOs, which, typically I think are, it could be a little, in some cases, maybe a little difficult. In tech, there's a lot of big egos.
Personalities.
Yeah, a
Right.
lot of big egos, a lot of sometimes arrogance, right? It's not
But
lost.
that actually, really makes sense. It's like, okay, I'm going to support you, CEO, publicly, and my support, should warrant you taking a phone call and having, being
Yeah.
receptive to my ideas.
And I think it can go both ways, like as a CEO supporting their team and giving public praise to folks, and then giving private feedback within parameters. Like if somebody isn't doing a great job, then you can't like praise them
Right.
publicly
Right.
for
Right.
doing
Right.
right. But I think it is a fine line, and it's obviously situational. But yeah, I always thought that was kind of an interesting social dynamic too, to influence folks and get the results you need from individuals. Is thinking about the dynamic of social accountability and thinking about like what it makes sense to present publicly to the team versus like what conversations should be held independently, and then again situationally based on the type of person you're working with. Like, you know,
Mhm.
it's interesting, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
definitely.
Well, look, I think the other thing we talked about like was that concept of like clarity is kindness. So I was hoping you could explain to us what you mean by that when it comes to running to being a leader within an organization.
Yeah, I think in the last couple of years, when there has been such a focus on the employee experience, and which is great, and prioritizing the employee experience, I do think that we need to balance it a bit. Um, and we certainly experienced this here at Emtrain, and I think a lot of different organizations experienced it in the last couple of years, where you know, kind of a total focus on the employee experience without shining a light on the health of the business, and what the business needs to do. And it's a balance, and, being very transparent to the workforce on how the business is doing, onto an individual contributor on how that person's doing and what that person needs to do. It's not personal. It should not be personal. It's like, here's what you need to do. Here's what the business needs to do. And if the business succeeds, that's great. If you succeed, you'll help this business succeed. That's great. And if those things happen, then we will have the ability to prioritize the employee experience.
Yeah.
If those things don't happen, guess what? Maslow's law says we need to eat food and have a roof over our head. Those are the two things we have to do before we do anything else. And that applies in the business setting too. And I think we've kind of gotten a little bit too adrift from that. A company make money and retain its customers and acquire new ones. Basics. Those are the basics.
They are the basics, and I couldn't agree more. And I think we also kind of have probably a slightly different vantage point than most as CEOs. But yeah, I remember recruiting in 2021. Like I'm glad we could do this. We had the stat to share, but when we were hiring recruiters, which we were growing incredibly fast,
Mhm.
I think we went from like 1 to 5 million in recurring revenue in like 15 months, 18 months. It was nuts because of the demand. I mean,
Right.
as much as I would like to say that like I'm a genius, it's just not the case. It's just like, it was just, the market, right? But anyways, like it was just interesting because we were able to, despite hiring demand and the demand for recruiters specifically, which was the most in-demand skill set for the most part, we were
Mhm.
able to get our time to hire down to time to fill
Mhm.
to a little under 3 weeks in the height
Whoa.
of 2021. And we weren't even offering we were offering like 80th percentile salaries probably.
Mhm.
But there was competitors out there that were doing more. And so we did invest a lot in culture, and we invested, like, some companies have a mission, like, we probably gonna talk about Elon Musk more later in the episode, but like we're gonna put people on Mars. Like I do recruiting. Like I'm not putting anyone on Mars. Like I don't have anything like that to share with people. Like there's no,
Connecting people with their next opportunity. That's pretty
yeah,
cool.
right. It's just what I'm saying. It's not putting people on Mars. You know what I mean? Like it's just a different.
Right.
And so
Right.
like our pitch was basically our culture, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And so that's what we dialed into was, essentially taking the approach like our candidates are our customers, our employees are our customers, and how do
Mhm.
we optimize this experience? What are they looking for? And it was like, the work-life balance. They want their mental health days, recharge days, right? They're looking at, benefits. They want real structural like process in place to protect the things they care about. They don't want values on a wall. They, on a day to day, how is it like we incorporating the things that we care about, like diversity, right? Like we started doing a diversity push before we were at 20 employees. Like we started early as part of
Mm.
that social fabric, if you will.
Yeah.
And so we had to focus on all of those things. And that was basically part of like a huge portion of my job was just bending over backward, like trying to like, and then trying to filter through all the requests. Cause we got into this culture where like, I mean, shit, we would get like a dozen requests from employees every week. Like, oh, can we do this? Can we do this? Can we have this? Can we, and I'm like, and you have to do it. Cause like, it was just so one-sided. And now we've seen that like completely flip, and it's been interesting. And I think like what it's important to kind of talk with the members of your team about is like what you said, and also concept of like sustainability. Like the reality is like the folks that got like these insane salaries or these insane perk packages, they were the first to get laid off.
Yeah.
And they go the long because it was at the beginning of this economic cycle in tech that's like the downturn. They're unemployed for the longest period of time.
Mhm.
And so like one of the things that I share on LinkedIn is like you don't necessarily want to go with the company that's going to offer you the highest salary. I'm not saying you don't like advocate for yourself, and
Right.
that's a huge generalization. And if you get a great offer, by all means, go for it. But you have to look at it from a sustainability perspective. And so we had a competitor, for instance, that I actually really respect. And so this isn't in any way a knock, but they paid recruiter salaries that were like insane levels. Like
Right. So
33 to
yes, how
right.
sustainable is that? I mean,
Well,
really?
right when the market corrected at the beginning of Q3, they like cut 80% of their people.
Ouch.
And they probably backfilled the ones they needed to with like people at a significantly lower cost. And so
Yeah.
all these people that chose that opportunity, it's like, who's making more money, right? The
Right.
person who, for this is hypothetical, this isn't actually accurate to the salaries that, we have or they have, but like person making 150 that's employed for 6 months, or the person making 100 that's
Yeah.
employed for a year.
Right.
Like you have to think about it from that point too. And I don't think people were thinking about sustainability last year. Candidates weren't. I think maybe companies knew, but it's
I
like
don't,
they had to do it. Like,
you know what? I don't even actually think that the C-suite was thinking about it. I mean, I just think everyone, especially with professional investors on their board. I mean, I have a professional investor, and that team was pushing hire more. And as a, initially a bootstrapped entrepreneur, that's scary. I'm like, really? Hire more? So I have to believe like all these companies that, especially in tech, that were growing, at least their workforce, they were just being given, total like green light. Yeah, go spend more money, spend more, spend more.
yeah, I mean, that's where I, Sam Jacobs owns the company called Pavilion. Wow, I'm giving him 2 shout outs on one show. They should be giving us a little sponsorship money. But anyways, like he does like the CRO course, where Chief Revenue Officer course, and he talks a lot about unit economics and what scale means. And he's like, scale isn't hiring a bunch of people and adding to overhead. It's
No,
scaling your unit economics in a such where like your margins
right,
stay very similar and you're able to run a sustainable business that will ultimately either be profitable now or has a very clear path to profitability and maintaining healthy margins at scale. He's like,
yeah,
so he talks about these companies that are like, we're scaling, we're hiring 200 people. It's like, well, your
and that's not
ARR,
scaling. Yeah,
yeah,
that's not
your
scaling.
ARR is like 1 million and you're hiring like 75 people.
Right.
It's
Doesn't make sense. I
right.
mean, especially in software. I mean, software became attractive decades ago because of the margins. It's like, oh wow, 30% profit margin. This is pretty good. I mean, my husband just talked to a childhood friend who has a landscaping business, $15 million a year with a 40% margin. 40%.
Wow.
So we're all killing ourselves in software. It's like, that looks pretty good.
It does. It does. Yeah. No, that's maybe we should be looking into that right now.
Well, I think I only bring it up because I think, again, many people have become so attenuated and disconnected with unit economics and the basics, business basics.
Yeah.
And I don't really care what your role is, even if you're a junior employee, everyone should have enough information just to understand business basics. Everyone should understand, at least theoretically, the idea of, money coming in, money going out, and the margin. Like, if nothing else, those are 3 things they should understand.
Yeah,
If
for sure.
you're going to be taking someone's paycheck.
I agree with you. And I don't think a lot of people were focused on that last year at all.
No,
No, it was just, I don't know why it's like human nature to think that like good times are going to last forever, or that, we have it, I think inflate our own, like like our own perception of our own success or abilities in an up market. And we probably deflate too much in a down market, right? Like, you're not a genius when things are going great, and you're not a, complete idiot when they're not. It's probably,
right.
somewhere in the middle, and hopefully, or, that's or the higher end of the spectrum, we'd like to think.
Exactly.
But I think it's just interesting, like, when people were getting these insane salary jumps, like from, 60 to like 120, and they're like, thinking that they're, the best,
Right.
incredibly good. It's like, well, no, you're just riding a wave, and sometimes that, that wave's going to crash.
Right.
And so it's tough. And there's probably folks too that got these insane salaries, probably increased cost of living, and now they're not able to necessarily demand the same
Yeah.
salary, or they are, but inflation is eating away at those gains. And
Right.
so it's just interesting to watch. It's really, I'm hopeful that we'll start to come out of this thing, but I think I don't know. I think Q3 is going to be a wash at least. Like it's not, I don't think it's going to be great for anybody. Maybe Q4 is going to get a little stronger, but like before Silicon Valley Bank crash, I was really thinking that, okay, we're starting to get momentum in Q2, things are going to look up. But after that, like any momentum we had was just came plummeting back down. And now I'm like, I pretty much think the rest of the year is going to be a grind at this point.
It's going to be a grind because if you look at, if we zoom out a little bit, and all those companies that own, commercial real estate are getting killed right now. So all the offices, they're getting killed. So that means cities are getting killed. All of the ecosystem of like the small restaurants, the small cafes, all the workers, it's a domino effect, right? And so it's rough. And for those of us who have been around for a while and have seen different cycles, it's like you could kind of identify different elements of different cycles. So like, I've been around for the dot-com bomb in 2000, 2001.
How long did that last?
So the dot-com bomb, it was March of 2000. That was the bad, that was bad. And that was bad. So that was all of the rest of 2000, all of 2001. And probably a little bit of 2002. You could go down the 101, you go to San Francisco to San Jose like that. Like usually with traffic, in like an hour and a half to get down there, you could get down in 20 minutes because there was no one on the freeway.
That is wild.
And everyone, because the Bay Area is always such a mecca for all the college graduates. They all like moved to the Bay Area. Everyone moved home. Woo.
It's just like after COVID.
Right. So I can think about that. I could think about the financial, meltdown in 2009, 2010. That was shorter. That was shorter than the dot-com bomb. Dot-com bomb lasted longer. So, it was bad in 2009 and probably a little bit of 2010. Then it started picking back up. And then you had this huge, then you had this huge sustained time of just growth. Right. That was great.
I know that was like a lot of the most successful companies in my space, like the recruiting space for the tech industry. They started like right in 2009 and rode that whole wave.
Yeah. Beautiful.
Like, damn. I hope that, I don't know if that's ever going to happen again, like in my lifetime where it's like, or our lifetime where it's like, 10-year growth, like just straight growth, just consistent.
If you think about it, so 2000, so it was about 10 years, and then failure, and then figure 2000, let's say 2010 to 2020. So I think we pushed the envelope for a few years because the pandemic was like artificial acceleration to all of tech because we needed tech to communicate.
Right.
I think otherwise we probably would have had a correction earlier, frankly.
Yeah.
So it's a 10-year cycle. So like we got, probably a year to 2 years of the craps.
Yeah, it's just gonna suck. It's funny though, like I just don't like, it's really hard. And I think I want to be careful about how I communicate to be respectful of like everyone on my team and other teams that have gone through a really hard time in the layoffs. Like all of that is incredibly awful. So just to be very clear before I say this next part, like for me personally, I feel like I'm actually pretty much so to like process that. I don't necessarily mind. It just is what it is. It's part of our job description to deal with this shit. And I feel like I'm actually in a pretty good headspace about this. Like, and I think if we're thinking about leadership the right way, it's like, I know my 5-year plan. I know where I want the business to be. I'm not concerned too much with what happens in the meantime. There's always a way to figure it out, to find a way through. We're not going to go to zero. There's a way to get through it. And so to me, I think coming up on the bootstrapped road, which I know you did for a really long time as well, there's just a different level of grit. And I've been doing this shit for a long time. And none of it just doesn't, I take it seriously. I have an appropriate amount of anxiety. Don't get me wrong.
Yeah.
It's just that, right. I'm aware, like I'm in a dangerous jungle and there's shit that's trying to kill me. I have an appropriate level of anxiety. I also know how to navigate it, right? Like it's not my first time going through hard times and it just doesn't quite as bother me as much. And I think it's like too, just from a leadership perspective, like when you can get to that point where you could just stay very level-headed and analytical,
It's
And
comforting. It's
it's
comforting.
it's power. It's
It
real
is
lasting
power.
power too. It's like it's comforting, and it's also like I went to I hang out with a lot of CEOs. They're of course I'm biased, but I really like founder CEOs. They're we get along. There's a lot of shared
Well,
experiences, right?
yeah, making something out of nothing and having all the responsibility on your shoulders is a unique experience, and no one can understand it until they've lived it, really.
Right. It's true. And I think it's just interesting because I've been speaking with a lot of executives lately, and a lot of them aren't in a great headspace. Like,
Mhm.
and you're just kind of looking around like, okay, guys, like
Yeah.
everybody needs to remain focused here. And you really shouldn't be. I think some people are a little bit more too much like emotionally, they're letting emotions drive.
Oh.
And it's hard, but
Well, it's exactly what you said, James. It's like when you're the leader of a team and they're counting on you for their paychecks and to make their mortgages and their rent checks and all that and families. It is our job to, like, turn the emotions off, be just analytical and make the right decisions as quickly as possible.
right.
When things started getting, you know, more obvious that like we're in for, like a rocky road this year. I mean, we had a town hall and similar to you, like I've been around the block, I've got grit. Like people, I have been making payroll since 2004, like not missed one payroll and operated the business at some point, like we had 40 of us and literally like we were paycheck to paycheck, like money in the bank,
Yeah.
paycheck to paycheck. That's like driving a car and there's nothing under your feet.
Right.
It's
Yeah.
like it's like Fred Flintstone.
I remember being there too, like in the early days of SecureVision. Like I literally started this company with $300. I didn't have shit. I remember when I quit my job, I had 5K saved up total.
Yeah,
I didn't have experience. I didn't have connections. I didn't have a customer.
yeah,
I
same.
was like, just I don't know what I was thinking. Like if I do what I do today, would I do it? I don't know. I mean, obviously I
Well,
have my
same here.
skill set,
No,
but you know what I
no,
mean?
same here. I mean,
Yeah.
I started Emtrain and I was going up against, Littler Mendelson is like one of the biggest labor law firms in the country. They owned our direct competitor. They had thousands of clients all over the
Right.
country. They had lawyers, identifying. They had like Gary Mathiasen, who was the head of that firm at that time, twisted every arm of every partner. So every partner had to put in 100K. Like they started with like $5 million in the bank. And I was so dumb. I'm like, I'm
I
gonna
got it.
start a competitor business.
Right. Yeah. And it's funny though. It's like you find out, like it's like um it's just I was having a conversation with somebody recently, like an advisor of mine, and we were just joking around. It wasn't like a serious conversation, but we were talking about this stuff. And I was like, yeah, some reason, like, I was at the time dumb or arrogant enough to think I could do it. And the person was
Right.
just like, but you did.
But you,
Okay,
well,
fair, right? Like
and,
so it's like come out the
well,
other end and
and
you're
frankly, James, it
yeah.
takes ignorance. It takes ignorance
Right.
to do. You have to be like, naive enough to jump in.
Yeah, you
Because
have
if
to.
you're too savvy, you'll be like, oh God, no way.
Right. Yeah. You
No
have
way.
to be willing to, it's funny, right? It's like we should be living our life with intention and using sound reasoning in order to make decisions. And at the same time, an entrepreneur has to essentially ignore the odds because when you look at the business like percentage of success, so it's like, how do you reconcile being analytical and putting together sound judgments along with like saying, basically F the odds, I'm going to figure it
Right.
out.
Right. Yeah.
You know,
It's called a certain level of craziness.
this has been a really great conversation. I know the leaders tuning in will have learned a lot as a result of our conversation. So thank you for coming on today.
Oh, thank you, James. Always a pleasure chatting with you.
Yes. And for everybody tuning in, we are releasing a new episode every Tuesday and Thursday morning at 5 a.m. Eastern. If you or anybody you know would like to be a guest on the show, we are looking for VPs of talent acquisition, chief people officers, and founder CEOs of companies that are related to anything like talent acquisition, people, culture, anything under that umbrella works for us. Lastly, if there's any topics you want us to discuss that we haven't, reach out to us on talenttrends.io, shoot us an email. We have Morella's email on the site that you can find, and just let us know if there's anything you want us to cover. We got some really exciting stuff coming up here toward the end of the month. We're going to be bringing on some really incredible co-hosts onto the show from industry category leading software companies to join us that are from the recruiting space, and more news that we'll be sharing in the next couple of weeks. So thank you so much, and we'll talk to you real soon. Take care.